Hi, this is Janie's View. This is my new show, and I'm going to have guests on that are going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have lots of fun, and we're going to talk about all types of subjects that, like, from soup to nuts. You just won't even believe what we're going to talk about today. And I've got a guest that is a great guy that really has a great view on life, and he has some new views about life and about politics also. And I want to introduce you to my guest today. His name is Mick Hunter. This is Mick Hunter. Hi.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you're back.
Yes.
I'm glad you're back.
Congratulations on your new show.
Oh, thank you. Yes, you're my first guest on the new show. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
I love it. And make sure y'all see this. Make sure you see my award. We got an award.
Yep.
See? Isn't that cool?
Proof positive.
I know, very positive. Yeah. I guess you've been getting ready for the elections.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been writing letters to editors and speaking out and
Good.
trying to get people educated.
Yeah, they need to get educated because there's some really serious issues coming up
Right.
in this election. And I mean, life-changing issues.
Right.
He's an author of Back to the Source, The Spiritual Principles of Jesus. Okay, you're neither a clergyman nor a professional theologian. How did you come to write a book about teachings of Jesus?
Well, for years now I've been a psychotherapist, and I started out working with alcoholics and other drug addicts who end up getting referred to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, and they talk about it being a spiritual principle. And so I'm trying to work with people who were sexually abused by clergy or were told that their addiction was a result of their being bad people instead of it being a medical disorder and whatnot.
Right.
Or that they were told they had to choose between their partner, who happened to be same-sex,
Right.
or their religion.
Right.
And so then they end up going to these meetings and talking about God, and they're saying, well, I don't like the way God treated me. And so this is a book about the principles of Jesus minus any reference to whether he was a deity or not.
Right.
So just the principles of it, and then applying those to our current problems. And so it's been interesting how people have responded that I've offered to do workshops at different professional conferences about this, because the largest group, the group that's increasing the most when the Pew Charitable Trusts ask about your affiliation,
Right.
the largest group is none, not affiliated. And so that doesn't mean these people aren't spiritual.
Well, no.
It means they're not affiliated with any particular denomination.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so I'm saying that we ought to be able to educate the therapists that are working with people, because having a spiritual component to people's recovery is very important. And so I would submit these proposals, and I've spoken all over the world hundreds of times, and I'm used to my proposals being accepted. And one after another, I get turned down. Huh. And so one time somebody called and said, just between you and me, we saw your proposal and we didn't think you were that way. And I said, what does that way mean? Yeah, and he says, well, a Jesus freak. And I said, I'm not a Jesus freak. In fact, I'm not even a Christian.
Right.
He says, well, how can you write a book about Jesus if you're not a Christian? I said, well, by definition, you have to think that Jesus was the Christ to be a Christian, and I don't take a stand on that.
Right.
That's not what this book is about. So I actually have finally done a professional presentation. I have another one coming up in New York.
Good.
And that what I'm hearing is people are saying, all I ever heard was these stories about miracles and all that, but I didn't really see what relevance it had to my life. And so what people are missing is, learning the principles and then applying those. And that really, how can you use these principles in your present day life, regardless of whether you think there's an afterlife or not. And the biggest chapter in it is on same-sex marriage and the mistreatment of gays and lesbians in our
it's
culture.
just awful what they're doing.
So basically, people will tell me, well, it says in the Bible that homosexuality is an abomination, and I say, well, where is that exactly? And
where is that?
I don't really know. They'll say, is it in the Ten Commandments? Well, I don't know. No, well, it's not. No. Is it anywhere in the New Testament? Well, if you pay attention to just the words that Jesus said, there's actually a form of a Bible called the Red Letter Bible, which is everything that's supposedly a quote by Jesus is in red. Everything else is black.
Okay.
Okay. That's about 2,000 words. Okay. The introduction to my book is longer than that. Okay.
Right.
So you can really there's a finite amount of material, and so you can look at that and say, Jesus, what did he say about gay marriage? Okay.
Right.
Well, when I'm doing my presentation, I say, I'm now going to tell you every single word that Jesus said on gay marriage. There isn't one.
There isn't one word.
Right.
No.
The sections that talk about abomination are in the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible.
Oh, in the Jewish Bible.
Right. Okay. The Old Testament existed before the New Testament. Jesus was raised as a Jew. Okay. And that so people will say, okay, but it's in there, though. It's in the Bible. I say, well, do you know what else is in that same book, Leviticus? And I say, well, no. And I say, well, did you know that it's an abomination to eat shellfish? You know, so where's our amendment about getting rid of red lobster?
Right.
Okay. It's an abomination to get a tattoo. Where are people walking up and down in front of buildings saying God hates people who get tattoos? You know, you're not supposed to wear cloth made of two different materials. You're not supposed to cut the hair by your temple. I mean, you rattle off all these things, and they go, well, I've done most of those. I said, exactly.
Well,
So if you believe that if somebody commits an abomination, they're going to hell, well, get in line.
Get in line because everybody's going.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's going to go.
So I'm fascinated that people pick and choose. I'm going to say, well, this abomination is more of an abomination than that abomination because I don't do that abomination.
Right. Okay. That's what they're doing. They're picking the ones that oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
So most people have never really studied it to that degree.
No, that's so interesting.
So that's the first thing I point out.
That is so interesting. What do you have to say to people who claim same-sex marriage destroys the sanctity of marriage? Well, what about the heterosexuals that repeatedly get divorced?
Well, exactly.
See, to me, that's in the Bible. It's about divorce, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that Jesus didn't say anything about gay marriage, but he said a lot about divorce.
Divorce,
yeah, and doesn't see that as a good idea, and what's fascinating to me is the more hierarchical and rigid a religion is, the more likely they are to divorce. So evangelical Christians are 34% are likely to divorce, as opposed to Catholics, it's 21%, and Lutherans, it's 21%, and if you look at people who don't believe in God, their rate is 21% too. So you would think that if, religion is really fostering respect for marriage, the more religious somebody is, the more
they get divorced.
Yeah, the less they get divorced. But in fact, it's the other way around.
They get divorced.
Yeah. And that people will say, well, I get calls from ministers where they'll say, well, I'd like to refer a couple to you, but I need to know, do you consider marriage to be sacred? And I say, yes, I do. And they say, oh, good. And I say, and so if you can't keep it that way, then you ought to get out.
Oh, I love it. Okay. You don't believe, if you can't keep it that way, get out.
Yes, exactly. So, people can come from a broken home and everybody lives in the same home.
Isn't that the truth?
So, my main point in all the divorce stuff is, how come people are so obsessed with not letting people who want to marry.
That love each other.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah, they want to stop that.
Yeah.
Instead of spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get this amendment going, what if they took all that money and, paid for people to get marriage enhancement courses, you know.
Yeah, to help them
Yeah.
Succeed in their marriage.
Exactly, right.
To be happy.
Yes.
And I, you know, I'm one that was in prostitution for 13 years, and most men that I was with throughout those years, back many years ago, when I was a young kid, were married men. So if it's so wonderful to be heterosexual and be married, this is so perfect. Why are they all cheating on their wives?
Well, that's what I mean. If
I'm
you can't,
talking 13 years.
Yeah, if you can't keep it sacred, then maybe you ought to get out of it.
Get out of it, yeah.
Okay. And I don't hear people saying, well, you know, if you've been married and divorced 6 times, we're not going to permit you to have a church wedding because you're not keeping it sacred.
Oh, maybe that's a good idea.
So you could say, you know, maybe you get two church weddings, and then after
That's
that
it.
you're
That's
on your
it.
own.
You can't get
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Maybe one church wedding.
Yeah. And when people are arguing, well, this is so that children will have a mother and a father. Well, then let's have an amendment where you can only be married if you're heterosexual and you have children.
And you have children.
Okay.
That's the only time you can be married is if you have children.
Yeah. So
there's a good idea.
yeah.
That's a good idea.
So the whole
Because
idea.
otherwise, why do they get married? Otherwise, to raise children, right?
Well, that's what some people say is it's for marriage. Well, my wife and I have been married 29 years and we
Right.
haven't had children. You know, you would
Right.
think that at some point someone would show up and say, well, you know, we're going to have to annul this marriage because you haven't
don't have
had
any kids.
Yeah, exactly. And you didn't even try, so you're doing it all wrong. And we were joking last night. We went out with some friends and we said, well, if this marriage amendment, anti-marriage amendment passes, does that mean that our marriage is going to get annulled? I mean, do I have to go marry a man then after this? And you know, we were joking, but we really are frightened because
That's scary.
that it really is putting in the Constitution a statement that certain couples are not legitimate.
That's wrong.
And I would say that I've talked to some of my friends that are therapists and gay, and I said, well, you know, what's the problem that brings most people into therapy?
Right.
And he said, trying to deal with their religion and their sexual orientation, that they can't seem to have both. And that what I believe is, I'll tell you a story about how I decided to finally write this book. Is I was traveling for one of my other books, and I was in an airport, and I looked over and I saw this man pacing back and forth in front of a bar.
Yeah.
And I thought, social drinkers don't pace in front of bars. Social drinkers walk in and order a drink.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, only recovering alcoholics pace.
Probably.
So I said, well, this is the
didn't think of
story
that.
of Bill W. in Akron, Ohio, before AA, as he had a bad business trip, and he was going to get drunk. But he talked to Dr. Bob, and stayed sober that night.
Right.
And so, not being a recovering alcoholic, I thought what he needs is a recovering alcoholic. So I got on the courtesy phone.
Yeah.
And I had him say, any friend of Bill W., please meet at this bar. Oh. And from every terminal, I heard people running. And they run into this area, and they look around, and they go, that must be the guy. And they grab him, and they sit down, and they have an AA meeting. And then they walk him to his plane.
Oh, wow.
So he doesn't get drunk, he doesn't lose his job.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. And I was watching them, and I thought, you know, when they grabbed him, they didn't say, now, how do you vote? What's your sexual orientation? How much money do you make? How educated are you?
How much money do you make?
Yeah. They just said, you're an alcoholic, you need help, I can help you.
Right.
And I thought, you know, to me, that's the teachings of Jesus. You know, that if aliens from another planet landed and said, well, we heard about this Jesus fella, and we'd like to see some of that in action, I'd say, well, go to the nearest church,
Right.
and then go in the basement and go to the AA meeting.
Right.
And that's where you'll see that in action, is
True.
people being loved
Right.
who don't love themselves,
Right.
you know, who are hurting other people
Right.
and are miserable, and they are loved into loving themselves so
Right.
that they can love others.
So that they can get healed.
Right, exactly. And I said, you know, I mean, someone accused Jesus in the New Testament of being a drunkard.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if he was around, maybe he'd be at an AA meeting right now.
Maybe. That's That's a good one. I know it says in the Bible you can drink wine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or does it? Does it say that in the Bible that you
Well,
can drink wine?
Well, he certainly, there's a story about turning water into wine.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and that people, you know, you didn't have clean water, so you drank wine.
Drink wine, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
Right.
it was more pure.
Yeah.
I agree with that one.